Well, it turns out that trying to negotiate a trade deal with a fascist is really goddamn stupid. Donald Trump discovered a new reason to not have a trade deal with Canada because, of course, I am there. Where do I go with this? My last video discussing Mark Carney giving in, because that's what happened, to Donald Trump's demand on the digital services tax, and some of the comments on that video. Oh, you don't understand. Mark Carney is playing four-dimensional chess. He knows how he's working Trump. He's looking at all the angles, and he figures that giving in to Trump on this is going to negotiate him a fantastic trade deal. Is that what you thought? Because today, Trump says Canada's Palestinian move is new trade deal stumbling block. So before I get to what Canada declared or intends to declare, depending on some absurd conditions, I'll get to my thoughts around that. This is Trump on Truth Social saying, wow, Canada has just announced that it is backing statehood for Palestine. That will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. May I remind you, let's go back to November of 2024. Donald Trump threatens 25% tariff on products from Canada and Mexico, citing the invasion of fentanyl. And that would continue to be something that was cited as the reason for why they had to have these tariffs. CNN with their fact check, Canada makes up just 0.2% of U.S. border fentanyl seizures. Yet, despite the reality, Canada gave in. Canada buy helicopters, drones to meet Trump's demand for tighter border security. Canada says it will appoint a fentanyl czar to avoid Trump tariff threats. CBSA, the Canadian Border Services Agency, launches Operation Blizzard to target fentanyl. What do you think happened? Did Trump go, oh, you know what? Clearly, Canada is very concerned about this non-existent issue. But now that they made these good faith attempts to try and do something, we are going to work on a fantastic deal that is going to benefit both sides. Oh, no. This from July, as in this month, a couple weeks ago, Trump threatens 35% tariff on Canadian goods over dangerous cross-border fentanyl dispute. Lessons were not learned. U.S. ending all trade negotiations with Canada over the digital tax. This was the digital service tax. This piece from June 27th. Just a couple days later, June 29th, Canada rescinds digital services tax to advance broader trade negotiations. What do you think happened? I don't have to tell you. This happened. He discovered a new reason to ensure that there was no trade deal. This is the guy that tore up his own renegotiated NAFTA trade deal, the USMCA, that he did in his first term, comes in, completely violates it from every angle, and says, oh, we need something different, and has only put up roadblocks at every point. You cannot negotiate in good faith with a fascist clown. I hope this is a lesson at this point. So this is, the trade conversation, because we're going to move on to Canada's move here. But look, I'm not saying I have the answer. I don't know what to do here. If you actually want a trade deal with Trump, I don't think you're being realistic, because anything you actually sign, how can you trust that he's even going to abide by it, considering he didn't abide by his initial deal? So I think at this point you ride this out, hope for the best, hope that Trump is voted out in the next election, because I'm not sure you could really have any actual good faith negotiations with this absolute madman. That gets to the declaration today, or the intention of a declaration. Canada has long been committed to two-state solution. That's from Mark Carney. An independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. My statement on Canada's recognition of a Palestinian state. So, I'll touch on this briefly later, because I've done other larger videos on this. The real long-term solution here is actually one state with equal rights. But I understand how impossible that sounds right now. But it doesn't sound all that more impossible than two sovereign states peacefully living side by side with how things currently are. But that's a different discussion from what I want to really get into here. Is this declaration of Palestinian recognition? It's important to note that Canada is one of the few countries that has not already declared Palestine to be a state. In fact, the number is 147 out of 193 countries of the UN already recognize a Palestinian state. So, of course, France last week were the ones to kind of get this ball rolling with their pending declaration, as well as the UK and now Canada. And here is part of Carney's announcement.
For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to recognize the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state. Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful and hopeful future. I spoke today with President Abbas at length to reaffirm his commitments. Canada reiterates that Hamas must immediately release all hostages taken in the horrific terrorist attack of October 7th, that Hamas must disarm, and that Hamas must play no role in the future governance of Palestine.
All right, so while I want to acknowledge that the needle, you could argue, has moved in the right direction, there are serious issues with what is being proposed here, and I'll get to that. Worth mentioning first, though, this idea, this ongoing misinformation around these hostages. The reason why all of the hostages that are left are still not back in Israel is because of Netanyahu. This is being reported within Israel itself. So, deal after deal, he has sabotaged. This from The Guardian in November 2023. This is a month after October 7th. Netanyahu rejected ceasefire for hostages deal in Gaza. You go on. This is September 4th, about a deal in July. Netanyahu derailed a potential Gaza hostage deal in July. That's from Haaretz, which goes on to discuss, citing evidence revealing Netanyahu's relentless efforts to block hostage deal, torpedo the deal. Israel's Channel 12 News exclusive report features new documents and previously unheard conversations showing Netanyahu's efforts to sabotage any hostage deal. This has been continually ignored by both the Prime Minister and a lot of media, despite the fact that this is a major Israeli newspaper that reported this a year ago. So any idea that it's because of Palestinians who are being genocided by the Israeli government, that's why these hostages haven't been turned back, is absurd. Now, this gets to the issues with the demands in this call for a Palestinian state. Shane Martinez, who is a human rights lawyer, writing here, Canada's recognition of Palestinian statehood is conditional on Palestine being demilitarized, requiring the demilitarization of a state actively resisting annexation and genocide is fundamentally at odds with the right to self-defense enshrined in Article 51 of the UN Charter. So not only is it absurd to ask people who are being genocided to lay down their arms as opposed to the people committing the genocide, it is also a violation of international law. And considering that, again, Canada is one of the few countries left in the UN that have not already declared a Palestinian state, it's wild to add these sorts of demands to this declaration. Also worth pointing out here, Sharon Nadeem tweets this out. The announcement is a day after a major report revealed that Canada exported arms to Israel despite repeated claims from the government that they do not. Not a single reporter asked about it. This refers to this report. Arms Embargo Now is the site. I'll link to it below. We've just uncovered hundreds of shipments of weapons from Canada to Israel. So this was picked up by CBC News here. Writing report suggests arms still flow from Canada to Israel despite denials. Going on to write, the government of Canada is adamant, with certain shifting caveats, that it has not allowed arms shipments to Israel since January 2024. And yet, Israeli import data and publicly available shipping records appear to contradict that claim. The data was uncovered by a group of researchers from the 4 NGOs: World Beyond War, the Palestinian Youth Movement, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and Independent Jewish Voices. They found entries in the database of the Israel Tax Authority that show Canadian goods continuing to enter Israel, described by the Israeli government as military weapon parts and ammunition. This gets to the need to have a real arms embargo. You cannot continue supplying military weapons, parts, and ammunition to a country committing a genocide while also claiming you care about the human rights of the people being genocided. So I want to play for you a clip here from Heather McPherson. This is a NDP MP, the foreign affairs critic, who does a good job reacting to the news here.
140 countries across the world have recognized Palestine, some of them for a very, very long time. It's taken a campaign of starvation by Israel for Israel's Western allies, America's Western allies, to act. Recognition, however, is almost easier than pushing for a ceasefire. It's almost easier to say, OK, we'll recognize Palestine, but does Canada have any leverage over Israel to be able to get them to stop what they're doing right now?
You know, I think they do. I think Canada does have a moral obligation. Canada's a G7 country. It has a moral obligation to stand on the right side of international law, to stand on human rights, to stand on our own law, to be perfectly frank. You know, yes, this is an important step. This means something. This means something to Palestinian Canadians who have not felt that their government sees them or recognizes what is happening right now in Gaza and in the West Bank. But this is just one step. There are so many other things that the Canada needs to do. First amongst those would be an arms embargo and stopping the sale of arms to Israel. Well, Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinian people. I mean, that's the next step, and getting humanitarian aid into people. Like, the urgency of this issue. You know, for me to hear the Canadian government say September, when we know that tens of thousands of Palestinians are on the verge of starvation today, is hard. This is a step, but it is not the last step. It is not the only step that the Canadian government should be taking. Canada also can be sanctioning Netanyahu and members of his cabinet that have used genocidal language, that are perpetrating these crimes against Palestinian people.
I think a lot of Canadians have this idea, and I understand why they cling to it, why they continue having this idea that Canada stands up for human rights around the globe. Unfortunately, this is a massive stain on Canada's record. And not just post-October 7th, not just what's happening now, but for years. I've covered Gaza on this channel since this channel started. For 10 years, I've covered the ongoing human rights abuses being committed by the Israeli government against Palestinians, the apartheid state, the less than equal rights for Palestinians. This has been clear forever. And the reason why this is such a story and why this continues being harped on is because this is an ally. Israel is supposed to be an ally, or is an ally, of the US, Canada, other major Western countries. And these countries continue to defend what the Israeli government is doing, even though now even human rights organizations within Israel, like B'Tselem, are calling it a genocide. So the idea that Canada is this upholder of human rights around the globe, I mean, you can clearly throw that in the trash at this point, considering we are not doing anywhere near enough to try and stop or even condemn what the Israeli government is doing. I mean, even in the announcement of a Palestinian state, a lot of that announcement was focused on what Hamas needs to do, as opposed to the current genocide being committed by one side.